Hey guys, welcome to my second stream, and I'm going to continue where I left off talking about the Great Awakening, Reformation 2.0, Great Reset, etc., etc. This is more of a general discussion ahead of me doing the predictions because I just wanted to do a little general chat at this time of year without getting into anything heavy to just keep everyone positive, informed, just share a little bit of the gossip. So, now, you'll still get people who will say to you, oh, well, there can't be a conspiracy because, all these countries, they don't get along and they're always fighting and their politicians are always bickering. And, it just couldn't be. They wouldn't be working together. I mean, they're usually at war with each other. They're always at each other's throats. And I think people are just buying into the theatre. So much of the things they're bickering about or appear to be arguing about, are trivial, inconsequential. And it's the same thing of the antithesis coming into a synthesis. So very often these conflicts that we see between countries that are playing out in the news media or in the public arena all have one aim, and that's to steer everything to a final conclusion. Now, the best thing to say to people when they say, why would all these countries be on the same page? Well, every country is intertwined. No country exists as an island. I mean, some countries try, maybe like Cuba, but for prosperity and for the well-being of the politicians, every country is interlinked. They are tied in economically. They are tied in because they all need money. Every country has, pretty much. Most countries, I know a couple of Central American countries are saying that Bitcoin is a currency they can use. In Central America, they're getting quite, up with the game, guys. They're doing well there. But every country has a central bank. Most central banks are owned by the same people. They all are ultimately tied to the Bank of International Settlements, which is owned by the people we know, the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the de Medicis, the Bush family, the Russell Group, all these people, Carnegie Mellon, all these people who've basically been in control through Babylon, into Khazaria, through Italy and the Black nobility, through the Holy Roman Empire, then into the British Empire. Then the British Empire by extension through the American Empire. These people in the banking empire. These same people have always been in control. We can talk about why. Are they somehow all linked to the story of Noah? That there was previously a cataclysm, but a lot of people survived. And those people survived and they retained certain knowledge. And therefore, that's why they're so powerful today. Oh, they often talk about aliens, but are aliens just human beings in the future traveling back to this time, and when it's sort of a back to the future scenario, are they really aliens? Are they just of us? Are they people who escaped the planet in the last cataclysm, retained their knowledge, lived in another civilization, and are now coming back because we've reached an appropriate level of sophistication that they can interact with us, some of us? Are they interacting? Was that link always there? Because I feel there was always certain knowledge coming into this reality. For example, in Babylon, they knew already about Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, the planets far further than the naked eye could see, than they could see with a telescope. They knew about the musical scales, very much linked to astrology through harmonics, the whole idea of astrological energies. They knew about certain things which were beyond their levels of sophistication. And at certain times on Earth, we've seen these sort of jumps forward, right, in technology. So, I'm just wondering if there isn't kind of some link there. But I'm a little bit off topic. I was going to say all countries are connected because all countries rely on the monetary system. They will have to purchase oil. They can't do without oil. They must trade in dollars in order to get oil. They must have central banks. As soon as you've got a privately owned central bank, they control your money supply. They increase the money supply, creating debt whenever they increase it. They create more debt than money ever to pay the debt, which creates this huge ponzi scheme, which keeps them in power. No government has its own money. They can raise money through taxes, but that's never enough. They're always borrowing money. They're reliant on the central bank. Therefore, the central bankers can dictate what they do. And this always happens. And so to think that countries are operating separately, they're not. The governments are not in control, and it's naive to think they're in control. The people who control the money. What was it Rothschild said? I don't care who is in government. All I care about is who controls the money supply, because then I know I have ultimate control over what happens in countries. And just to Right, but just to mention this briefly, when we see the politicians doing certain things and acting with impunity, I'm thinking of almost ludicrous statements of Trudeau and that Jacinta Ardern woman, where they're almost so brazen about the whole thing. They're not even worried what they say to the press. They're talking about openly wanting to be dictators or discriminating and saying things that a few years ago would have been outrageous, and yet they're all acting with impunity. Why? Same reason Saddam Hussein did. Same reason they did in Serbia with Milosevic. Because the people behind the scenes egg them on. And they let them know, they get them into this false sense of security. They're doing all this stuff, thinking there's never going to be a payback. And there is. They should look at Saddam. They should look at Milosevic. They should look at Gaddafi. These were all people that the elites work with and egged on at one point, and then what happened to them? Well, in the case of Gaddafi, I think he was sodomized with a bayonet, so not nice things happen. So that's why our politicians are acting with impunity in the same way that Saddam was so brazen. Because behind the scenes they were saying, oh, even with Hitler, we could say, yes, behind the scenes they were telling him, yeah, off you go, you'll be fine. Yeah, do it, you're doing great, we're happy with what you're doing. So they do it. And in the end, that's why they're acting so brazenly, because they're being egged on by the people behind the scenes. But they will be the first to go. We know that when the communists took over in all the Eastern European countries, the first people that were lined up against the wall and shot were the intelligentsia, the academics, the people who'd probably gone along with the whole communist thing. They're the first people, and the aristocracy. So they're in a false sense of security. They don't know their history. They don't understand it, because the elites have a direct line to their ego. That's why they're like narcissists in power, because they know they can control them, because they are so full of themselves, So it's stupid to think that countries are against each other. In the short term, there are clashes. But just think of a classic example. When I was growing up, the first thing I remember being on the news, it was always on, was Iran, Iraq were fighting each other. Yeah, were the leaders ever injured? No, it's just the people, the average unfortunate people who sent to fight that are injured. In World War II, were any leaders injured, killed? Well, we think Hitler was killed in the end, but really, was anyone in the upper echelons killed, injured, on the front lines, fighting? You see, wars are happening at this level. Conflicts between countries happening at this level. At the top level, people are cashing in, and business is cashing in. Like I say to you, the companies that became the biggest post-war, what came out of IG Farben, IBM, the Coca-Colas, your Volkswagens, Mercedes-Benz, the telecommunications company, what became AT&T, Standard Oil, every company that became massively big and part of the globalists were linked to World War II, and were dealing with both sides, dealing with the enemy. So any company, when you look back at their history, if they were in the World Economic Forum, you can look back and you probably find that there was something in World War II where they were, gaming it, working both sides. So people who think the government in conflict, they're looking at the small little view, they really don't understand the big picture, and they're not thinking of money. To just go back to money, in 1913, which I'm going to look at the chart because it's quite interesting, of the Fed, which was established 1913, right? Prior to that was 1912, the year the Titanic went down. And apparently people on board the Titanic were not too hot on this idea. They saw the pitfalls, as did Jefferson. He said you can't have an independent republic unless you have control of the currency. He understood it. Jackson, the President Jackson, much underrated. He understood that the control of the money was vitally important. He saw that problem. And yet in 1912, I believe there was a meeting between Warburg, another key name you could put up there with Rothschild, Rockefeller, and the whole Oppenheimer banking elites. Warburg had a meeting with the maternal grandmother of Rockefeller. I don't know if it was the Harry, whichever one. And they put the plans together for this privately owned Central Reserve Bank. And what else was established in 1913? Not only the Fed, the FBI, the IRS, and also the ADL. So you can see there from the kind of fact-checking side, the ADL, Defamation League, who are going to kind of defame anyone who said anything about this. The FBI were going to enforce it, the IRS to collect taxes, and you had the Fed. And out from that flows everything, control of money. Every time they create money, they create debt. And we are every dollar created, pound created. It's creating debt being paid back to keep these elites in power. But I do believe that that money power is reaching the limit of its potential. And it's like Dr. Zelenko, I mentioned it in the other broadcast. He said about 30 years ago, it became clear that this was now unsustainable. It was all going to crash. That's why they want to move us over to crypto. I'll come back more on that. I'm doing a Rumble, a BitChute, and an Odyssey as a part 3 to this, but they won't be on here. So I'll leave the links. Please go over there and check. It's really easy. I was just going to mention, again, a rather interesting that I was looking up at the I just happened to look at Jacob Rees-Mogg. Now, if you guys are in another country, he's an MP. He's quite high up in the Conservative Party. He was a key Brexiteer, and he was very popular among the patriot kind of movement in the UK at a time. Not sure if he's so popular now. He's a Gemini. I think he plays both sides rather well. I once analysed his chart, and I said he was a bit of a stirrer, a little bit of a game player, a little bit of a manipulator. But I was interested to know that after studying history at Oxford, his first job was at Rothschild Bank. That's interesting. And I also got to find out that John Redwood, who I had kind of previously admired as an MP because he seemed rather sensible, he worked at Rothschild Bank. So did Oliver Letwin, not one of my favourite MPs, another Tory. So did Norman Lamont, former head of the Exchequer. And if you have a look at everyone who's worked at Rothschild, they've all gone to occupy key positions in British industry, which a lot of people say, well, I guess, you know, they headhunted, they're rather good at their job, or rather talented if Rothschild employs them. So it's not really unusual that they should occupy key roles in industry. Nikki Oppenheimer is another one. But it does seem to me that there's a select clique. You know, if you're part of the clique, which Rees-Mogg obviously was, then you can select it to go and work for Rothschild. And from there, he went to Hong Kong to run some sort of investment thing or work for some investors. And then he was straight back into the UK to set up a kind of a private equity sort of investment company based in the Cayman Islands. Now, the Cayman Islands are key. That's one of the places, all these secret trusts and foundations that hold all the secrets of the true wealth. And the true wealth isn't Bill Gates and Elon Musk, who they tell you've got millions or billions, obviously. The key wealth is in these families who've held it for millennia, right? And once I remember a lecturer said when I was studying economics, and he said, you know, the reason time travel is impossible. He said, because if you could time travel, everyone would go back to, say, the turn of the century and invest $10 or 10 Rand, he said. Because if you invested 10 Rand on compound interest 100 years ago, you'd be fabulously wealthy now. That's how compound interest works. So you see, it makes total sense that if you come from a family, the aristocracy in Europe, or the black nobility that came out of Italy, the wealthy trading elite, once, you know, trade was developed, Phoenicia and the whole thing, that trading elite. But if we go further back, there were the money men, even in Jesus' time, when he flipped over the tables of the money lenders. If you had money back then, as long as you didn't blow it on gambling, you know, everything would have increased in value. You know, as inflation has gone on, as time has gone on, property values increase, money's increased. So if you were in control of money back then, which would have been a very select group of people, it goes that your descendants will be the ones in control of the money power. And they don't declare it, and they don't put it on the Forbes lists, and it's secretly invested in all sorts of tax havens, one of them being Cayman Islands, also Jersey, Guernsey, and Isle of Man, other islands out there in the Caribbean. So the fact that Rees-Mogg, he's really plugged in, isn't it, working for Rothschild, starting this whole private equity firm in the Caymans, just gives you a whole new slant on it. I was also looking at a lot of the people who've gone into politics who used to work for Goldman Sachs. That's another key zone. So, I mean, a lot of our politicians are bankers. They've worked for banks. They come out of that world. So when you look at politicians and people say, oh, this one's a socialist politician, oh, and this one's on the conservative side or whatever, they all coming out of Goldman Sachs or Rothschild or banking. So they're not conservative, they're not socialist. They're playing the socialist game. And the whole thing as well about communism versus capitalism. I did a long time now, we go back to it because I think it was a terrific podcast where I said, why do capitalists love communism? It was capitalists, it was people in the elite in the UK who sponsored the Bolsheviks. They were financed out of New York. We're not talking about a grassroots uprising in the Russia of Russians. Well, maybe they were Russians, but some of them. we had Russian roots somewhere, but we're not talking about a grassroots uprising of socialists. We're talking about capitalists funding it, driving it, fueling it as an experiment, again, to create they've got to have opposites. That's how they drive every policy. That's how they drive their conspiracies, by making things look opposite, so they can create this conflict, so they can create fear, because a lot of these are coming out of the Rand Corporation. A lot of which is a kind of neo-con think tank. But the Rand Corporation, key to this kind of one of the key think tanks in this whole Illuminati Council of 300 setup, they knew to use Trotskyite tactics through fear, like the Red Terror. They created fear by creating the threat of the Soviet Union, the threat of the nuclear holocaust, kind of thing, the nuclear cataclysm. Because they knew fear drives policy, fear helps control people. When people are fearful, they're looking to the government for help. When they're looking to the government to help, they can offer solutions, and solutions are always more control, more authoritarianism, and more transfer of wealth upwards. And so this whole thing about capitalism, they use capitalism when it suits them, they use communism when it suits them. They don't care, they're indifferent. They see both as just very emotive issues that they can get people totally caught up with, and it's another way of separating people. When you actually study them, it's quite hard to separate out. It's a very capital. When you look at communism, socialism, fascism, it's all combined in a way. Fascism and capitalism a little bit combined. It's all a minestrone soup of things, but it's easy to divide people with this whole stuff. And I wanted to go say something else about fascism and capitalism. What we have now really is fascism at the top, because we've got corporations working in tandem with government. The government love it because the corporations are helping the government control people, because we've got all the Googles, Facebooks, Twitter doing all the censorship and the fact checking and doing the propaganda. So that's how the corporations are helping government. Government are being helped by and the government are helping corporations by using the fact that governments got the army for force, got the police force for force, and the governments can set laws and prosecute people through the courts. So if the corporations are wanting to push certain products, that's easy for them, because the governments might mandate these products or heavily push them. So you can see corporations and government working in lockstep. This is what Mussolini called fascism, and that's what we have now. But at the same time, bringing in things like universal basic income, increasing levels of surveillance and control and restrictions on day-to-day living and life, less choice available in the economy because of the green thing. That's all communism. So we've got communism operating at one level, fascism operating at one level. These things are not mutually exclusive. They all, working together, but it takes a fairly sophisticated audience to be able to log on there. Most people will be confused, and most people just think fascism equals Hitler equals some sort of, they've got some idea about it that's very narrow. Okay, right. So where did I want to go after that? Because I got on a thing. Let me just pause that while I recap where I was. So we have this thing in England now where we don't have restrictions. Everything's quite normal compared to our cousins in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and to our friends in Europe where there are much tighter restrictions. We don't really have restrictions, apart from we do have mask wearing in the stores. And there were 100 MPs sort of standing up, and people saying, oh, well, Boris has been spooked because he's down in the ratings, had a couple of bad by-election defeats, and these MPs are kind of standing up. But I don't think we should be fooled. And in terms of all the MPs, I'm afraid it's too much, too little, too late, as the song goes. All this information was available last year. They had the information last year, and they could have stood up last year, but they didn't. So, as I say, too much, too little, too late. Let's not trust them. Plus, we have even people I'd always liked Ian Duncan Smith. I'm afraid he's plummeted in my estimation, because he was saying certain things, as you can imagine, on talk radio that were not pleasing to me. They were on the lines that there's no excuse for not taking your 2 shots of vodka and your martini. Everyone should be enjoying a drink, especially at this time of year. Yeah. It's the same message, all on the same hymn sheet. Nothing new, nothing different. Just to go back to the Pope and also Justin Welby, who is the head of the Church of England. He used to be, he was a vicar at a place I know very well, actually, a place where I lived as well, but I lived there just after he was vicar. But one of my good friends was his next door neighbour when he was living there, and he didn't think he was particularly talented. And I believe he actually comes from the oil industry, but he had a road to Damascus conversion, and he decided to go into Christianity. And now he's the vicar. Now he says that we are all, what was the words he used? Not selfish. We are immoral. We are immoral. Do you know that, guys? We are immoral because we do not want to partake in the proliferation of a substance being purveyed by companies that have been sued for the greatest amounts of dollars in history, in legal history. We're talking, they've paid out billions in recompense and damages for things like malfeasance, medical fraud, bribery, racketeering, corruption, and apparently it's immoral not to follow the word and accept with blind faith the word of those particular entities. You know, they have such wonderful track records in the courts, and but it's immoral, right? Not to go along them. No, Brother Alexis Bugnolo has made it absolutely clear that to put blind faith in wicked people is what is immoral. You know, whether you believe in God or you believe in your soul, your consciousness, whatever your belief is, you must use your rationale, your reason, and it's up to you to think for yourself. And I think that's why I always go back to the Reformation, because wasn't that what Martin Luther was saying? Apart from people who want to say from the Catholic Church point of view they didn't like him, I think he's got a good solid point there. Think for yourself and go straight to God. You don't, these intermediaries, why are they above you? We being shown now. And even on Gareth Ike's show, he had a member of the Hare Krishna community, and he was saying it's pretty much the same for them, that their leadership, although technically neutral, are using temples for the procedure, you know, the medical procedures. So even they are not neutral. Okay, I think I'm going to take the rest of this off to Odyssey and to BitChute and to Library and all those other platforms. I will leave links below and see you there.